want to chat quickly about human-centered design. It's one of those words which is gaining a lot of press. These are the actual underlying principles of human-centered design. So we're going to develop a bunch of design principles. This is almost your base point to start with. And basically, if you ignore these principles, then you're not doing human-centered design. So, ultimately, we want to make sure that when we ideate and we produce prototypes and probes, let's rather say probes, concepts, prototypes, and pilots, that's the natural sequence. What we want to make sure is when we're testing, we're actually testing against these types of principles. So if we're not able to meet all of these principles, well, then we're actually not doing human-centered design. So you can see that if I'm looking at a wireframe, or I'm looking at some type of product, or an IKEA kitchen or table or car, or whatever the case might be, I need to be able to reflect back upon some of these principles to see whether I've adhered to them or not. So honor your human. Right? Have you actually catered at the right level of empathy, so that you're actually giving them the respect due, as they're not just a number. Picture arriving at an airport and that whole process of engaging with and dropping your luggage off and all that other type of stuff. Classic case of, in my personal opinion, not honoring thy human. It's just, where slabs of meat, and let's get those slabs of meat onto a plane and up in the air. Well, predominantly when you're flying in the USA space, that's what I feel about the USA sort of airline industry. So, they're breaking that human-centered principle, first one. Okay, know you're human. And we spoke a little in the previous module around empathy and those types of things, but, true understanding of the motivations and the behaviors of people. And I'll hats off to the gaming industry, and also the marketing industry, but mainly the gaming industry. I mean, a phenomenal amount of insight that they bring to the table around knowing and understanding human behavior. And I mean, I have clients that I help with do business model innovation, and we look at some of them are gaming companies that provide insights and behavioral insights based upon gaming patterns. Fascinating study. I mean, so much information can be extracted from how people interact with the game. Far more advanced than what you would get from interviews and observation, even of those things. People let their boundaries down when they're playing in a game, and you can pretty easily within 5 minutes determine if somebody's a tactical or a strategic type thinker. So there's all of those techniques out there that get us to the point where we know the human. And those are big data techniques, but there are also other observation type of human to human interaction techniques. Right. And ultimately, the job's to be done, and what drives them. There's two types of the motivators. There's an intrinsic and extrinsic motivator. So the extrinsic is all about, we want to make money. We want to get some extrinsic reward of some type. Whereas intrinsic is the deep-seated motivations that I have and why I'm doing things. Why am I an entrepreneur? What the heck, it's the biggest roller coaster ride of your life. The emotional ups and downs. Is it really worth it? Well, there's an intrinsic motivator to bring meaning to this world in a way that has greater impact. And if you can affect somebody's intrinsic motivators, you get a much longer lasting effect on their behavioral change that you're trying to create. Extrinsic motivators, it's like you're dealing with behavior. You're not changing people's hearts, and you're motivating them with a carrot and stick type of approach. So that intrinsic and extrinsic behaviors are really the deep-seated things that you want to get to know. Once again, also knowing their context. Unless you understand, we've spoken about people mapping in context. All the interaction points that we have. This is where journey mapping and those types of things are quite valuable, where we start to understand the emotive drivers as people touch different parts of your organization. We actually use a gamification technique to validate the emotions that people experience at different points across the journey map. Fascinating study. Some of the stuff in there isn't relevant to business, but it's also pretty interesting to understand the different emotional factors and the levers you can pull to change people's behavior. And also know your human factors. I'll deal with that in the next slide. And know your human-centered design methods. And effectively, some of those things are what we're actually learning during this stage. Now, these factors are the 5 perspectives of human action. So whenever I'm actually looking at any type of environment, All right, I must consider and get to grips with these categories. So, for example, a societal human factor. Well, that's all about things like public opinion, social values, cultural norms, policy, agenda, budget, all that other type of stuff. An organizational human factor is all about leadership systems, corporate culture, reward structures, staffing, all of that type of stuff. If you're in a corporate, you're pretty familiar with those things. There's team structures, so coordination of actions of people and teams, the authority, hierarchy, holacracy, communication patterns and responsibilities, RACI models, all that type of stuff sits in there. There are the psychological bits, which are emotional and cognitive, memory, learning, behavioral type aspects that we're actually looking to consider to understand more. And then finally, there's the physical component, which is the biological sort of anatomical type, size, shape, body weight, all of those types of things. Now, when you're planning your research, you need to consider if your research context, we spoke about context and mapping, and all the tools I'm going to use within those are covering all of these perspectives. My suggestion is you need to cover all 5 of those. That's going to give you a much better insight into all of these pieces. And remember, a lot of stuff is hidden behind some of these aspects. So, for example, at a societal level, you might be looking at a tennis stadium, but there's some societal expectations that sit, as somebody's about to serve, everyone in the audience goes quiet. Well, who told them to go quiet? Nobody speaks, so there's this underlying understanding that people should keep quiet while somebody's serving in a tennis stadium. Well, there's a societal human factor that one has to consider, and there's a behavioral piece that we want to be able to work with. Right, so really that's when you're putting a research plan together, be sure to cater for all of those factors. So let's look at a couple of examples. Physical is, well, especially looking at the train. Can a 6-year-old child reach the bar on the train and the tram? There's some short people I've seen struggling to reach up and hold that bar. There's standing space in trains, but nowhere to hold on. People are sort of being flung around all over the place. Can a person with arthritis grip the door handle? Some are psychological examples. Does a thing that has been designed take into account mental models and cognitive biases? Can people comprehend, remember, judge, decide? These are all of those sort of pieces. Even if I spoke to you in a previous module about a door that had push written on it, but it had a handle for you to pull. So there was a wrestle on psychological aspects around how we're interpreting stuff as well as sort of physical. All right. And then teaming stuff, are people coordinating their actions with others? So, for example, sort of swarm type behavior. How do people queue at a bus stop or when they're ordering a product? There's some fascinating behavior. I was at a Boost store the other day and just saw the natural organization that people had as they queued to order, and then they fell into the exact same queue that would allow them to have to fetch their drink in the right order. And there was no indicators for that. There's nothing that actually mentioned that they should do that. There was no boundaries that they needed to stand behind and get queued behind. They just fell into a natural sort of teaming structure. So those are the types of things that we would consider as we're researching. The organizational bits, did this situation get out of control because of poor leadership? So there might be some organizational questions we can ask. And I've spoken to you about a societal one, which is, for example, the tennis space and the underlying concept of keeping quiet. So perhaps take a look at our tennis stadium and just go away and take those 5 factors and see if you can identify societal, organizational, team, psychological and physical factors in there, and what type of research you might want to know about it when looking at a context like this, which is the Australian Open. Catch you soon.